In Lesson 1-3 today, we will be learning about rounding numbers. Remember that when we do much of our work in each lesson, you will need a whiteboard and a whiteboard marker and eraser. That will allow you to do your work on there, or you may need your math journal if I'm completing a math journal page. So on your whiteboard, we're going to start with just reminding ourselves about place value. So on your whiteboard, just number 1, 2, and 3. Do not write any of the questions. Number 1, 2, and 3. And you are going to write answers only. What is the value of the 6 in 67? The 7 in 47? The 9 in 903. Go ahead and pause the video and answer. The value of the 6 is 60. The value of the 7 in 47 is 7. And the value of the 9 in 903 is 900. Go ahead and erase your whiteboard and number 1 to 3 again. What is the value of the 4 in 1,416? Number 2, the 5 in 5,890. And the 2 in 3,128. Go ahead and pause the video. Write your answers down. The value of the 4 is 400. The value of the 5 is 5,000. And the value of the 2 is 20. Erase your whiteboard and number again. 1, 2, and 3. What is the value of the 4? This time I'm not going to read the number for you. The 1 and the 3. Go ahead and pause the video and write down your answers only. The value of the 4 in 14,002 is 4,000. The value of the 1 in 10,234 is 10,000. And the value of the 3 in 346,041 is 300,000. Take a look at this for a minute. Notice, boys and girls, in the first problem, if I just replace the hundreds, the tens, and the ones with the 0, I've given you the value. If I take the 3 in 300,000 and every place value after it turns to a 0, it gives you the value. So on your whiteboard, I want you to draw a number line, just like you see in letter A at the top. I would like you to write 30 as the lower number and 40 as the higher. Go ahead and make little marks on there. And don't have to write halfway number, but go ahead and put a line there. Pause your video. Now what I want you to do is think of the number that is halfway between 30 and 40. Go ahead and write it in. It would be 35. Now, using that same number line, I want you to put a line where you think 37 would be. Where would 37 be? Go ahead and plot it on your first number line. So I know it's more than 35, but less than 40. So maybe right about here. Okay, now go ahead and erase that. Draw another number line using 880 as the lower number. You don't have to write lower number, but go ahead and write 880. And then on the other side, draw a line and write 890. Then I want you to think about this point in the middle. What number is halfway between 880 and 890? Go ahead and write it. You should have written 885. Now go ahead and I would like you to find where 881 would be. Go ahead and mark where 881 would be on this number line. Go ahead. Pause the video as needed. So if I think of 881, I know that it's more than 880, but less than 885. So maybe right about here. All right, erase that and draw one last number line. This should say C. On the left side, please write 3,400. And then on the far right side, 3,500. Remember to stop the video as needed. Now go ahead and draw a dash or a line halfway between those two numbers. What would be halfway between 3,400 and 3,500? Here's a clue. What's halfway between 400 and 500? Pause the video, write it. Halfway, boys and girls, would be 3,450. Go ahead and study this roller coaster chart. It lists some of the roller coasters around the United States and even in other countries. You'll notice the location in the second column and the length of the roller coaster in feet and the longest drop. So I'm looking for the length of the Kingda roller coaster. So I'm going to find Kingda and go all the way over till I find the length. So if your whiteboard is not clear, please clear it off and write down how long is the Kingda roller coaster. 3,118. Then below that, I want you to go ahead and write. Well, we'll round to the thousands place. So what we're going to do is look at the number in the thousands place, which is a 3. We're going to go ahead underneath that and keep that the same, keep it a 3, and replace everything after it with a 0. Then on the other side of your whiteboard, I want you to add 1 to the digit in the thousands place. So 1 more than 3 would be 4. Go ahead and write that. Kind of like if you think about how we just did the number line. This is the lower number. This is the higher number. Where would 3,118 be on that number line? Go ahead and pause and write where you think that number would be. The first thing that I know is halfway would be about 3,000, would be 3,500. So I know that number is less than that. So maybe it would be right about here or similar to that space. So you think about, is that closer to 3,000 or closer to 4,000? It's closer to 3,000. So Kingda Ka, rounded to the nearest 1,000, would be 3,000. So that's one way of rounding it, is finding the lower number and the higher number, thinking of it as a number line, and then finding which one it's closer to. We're going to try this again. Go ahead and find the Intimidator roller coaster. I see it right here. I'm going to look all the way over until I find the length of it. Go ahead on your whiteboard and write down the length of the Intimidator 305. Now think of that number line for a minute. Go ahead and draw it if you'd like. We're going to round to the nearest 1,000. Now what we just did was we said, okay, what number's in the thousands place? And that's why we did the work the other day with place values, so that you have built upon the information and can do more with it. So with the thousands place is the 5. So we're going to keep the 5 the same and go ahead and turn everything else after it into a 0. That would be the lower number. Now add 1 to the 5, and that would be 6,000. That would be on the other side of your number line. Now we know about halfway. Go ahead, you can put this is 5,500. So is 5,100 closer to 5,000 or 6,000? Go ahead and put it on your number line. Maybe about here. So is it closer to 5,000 or 6,000? It's closer to the lower number. So rounded to the nearest 1,000 The Intimidator 305 is closest to 5,000. Erase your whiteboard. This time we're going to look at the Goliath roller coaster. And the Goliath roller coaster is listed here, and its length is 4,480 feet. Go ahead and write 4,480 on your whiteboard. It's going to ask us to round it to the nearest hundred. I'm going to teach you a different way, maybe a faster way, and maybe this method works better or the number line works better for you. You have to decide. But in this case, we're going to round to the nearest hundred. So I'm going to circle the number that's in the hundreds place, and I'm going to draw a little arrow. I'm going to draw an arrow to the neighbor, and this is what I would do if I were in school. I'd say, hey neighbor, 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. Let me say that again. 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. So if I look at the hundreds place, I have to circle that, look to the right, look to the neighbor. Your neighbor's right next door. If it's 5 or more, raise the score. It means it's going to go up to the higher number, 1 more. If the number to the right, the neighbor to the right is 4 or less, a 4, a 3, a 2, a 1, or a 0, it will rest. It will stay the same. So 4,480, I look to the right, it's 5 or more. It's a 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. I raise the 4, 1 more to 4,500. Remember to be writing this on the whiteboard as I am as well. Let's go ahead and wipe off that whiteboard, and we're going to see how long is the Steel Dragon roller coaster. So the Steel Dragon is right here, the Steel Dragon 2000, and its length is 8,133. Please write 8,133 on your whiteboard. We're going to round it using our chant. 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. I'm going to circle the number in the thousands place. So whatever you're rounding to is the one you circle. Then you're going to go to the neighbor and say, hey neighbor, draw an arrow to your neighbor. Get in that habit. It's a really good one. And you say to yourself, 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. So I go to the neighbor, it's a 1. Well, that's 4 or less. So I'm going to let the 8 rest. And it's going to be closer to 8,000 than 1 more, which would be 9,000. Let's try another one. This time we're looking at the length of the ultimate roller coaster. Its length is 7,450 feet. Would you please write down 7,450 on your whiteboard? We're going to look at the place where we're rounding to 100. We're going to circle the number in the hundreds place. And then, because we're very friendly fourth graders, we're going to go to our neighbor, draw an arrow to the neighbor. And we're going to say the chant, 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest, meaning keep it the same. So if I look to the neighbor, 5 or more, it's a 5. Raise the score. So what's 1 more than 4? 5. And everything else turns to a 0. So on your journal page 7, go ahead and open your journal to math page, journal page 7. At the very top, it tells us we are rounding. Complete the number lines, plot the numbers on the number lines, and then use them to help you round the numbers. So we're going to round 4,698 to the nearest 1,000. So the first thing I'm going to do is circle the number in the thousands place. Remember, when we're using the number line, we're going to go ahead and keep the 4 the same and turn everything to a 0. Fill in your math journal as we're doing this. The higher number. What's 1 more than 4? 5. Halfway between that would be 4,500. Go ahead and fill that in. Now we're going to ask ourselves, is it more than halfway or is it less than halfway? 4,698 is right probably about here. So is it closer to 4,000 or is it closer to 5,000? And we know that it would be closer to 5,000. Let's do one more together and then you'll do one on your own. We're going to, in number 2, round 5,778 to the nearest 10. So the first thing you have to do is circle the number in the tens place. Now we're going to look at the tens place. The lower number is 5,770. What's one more than 70? 80. 5,780. So halfway we're going to put in would be 5,700. And what's halfway between 770 and 780? 775. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put where that number would be on the number line. Go ahead and do that. Remember, you might need to pause the video as needed. So I would say if I was going to put it maybe right about here on the number line, then is it closer to the lower number of 5,770 or 5,780? And it is closer to 5,780. Now, in each of the following, number 4, 5, and 6, I'm going to do one in each section. And then I want you to try it yourself. If you get stuck, I can work on it with you during our time in Zoom together. So in number 4, it says round 3 you're going to do on your own. We're going to skip down to number 4. You're going to round to the nearest 100,000. So the first thing I'm going to do is probably, so I don't forget, circle the number in the 100,000s in all of my problems. Then remember, I'm a friendly neighbor. I'm going to go to my neighbor, draw an arrow to the neighbor. 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. So I look to the neighbor, it's a 7. It's 5 or more, so it's going to raise one more. One more than 2 would be 3, and everything after the 100,000s turns to a 0. So in other words, it's closer to 300,000. Actually, let me do one more. Next one, we're going to go to our neighbor and say, hey, neighbor, 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. So I go to the neighbor's a 0. Well, that's 4 or less, so I let the 8 rest. So I keep it 8, and everything after the 100,000s turns to a 0. Now, we're going to move on to number 5. You're going to come back and finish for C, D, E, and F on your own. Number 5, we're going to round each number to the 10,000s place. So the first thing I want to do is circle the number in the 10,000s place. Then I'm going to go to my neighbor. I'm a friendly kind of girl. I'm going to say, hey, neighbor, 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. So that 8 is 5 or more. Raise the score. So the 4 becomes a 5, and everything after it turns to a 0. Okay. B, they're going to try to trick you a little bit on that one. All right, let's go to our neighbor, draw an arrow. Go to your neighbor and say, hey, neighbor, 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. So we know that the number to the right of our 10,000s place is 5 or more, so we're going to raise the score. What's one more than 9? 10. Now watch, everything else after it turns to a 0. 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now put in your commas. 1, 2, 3, comma. To the nearest 10,000 is 100,000. Now lastly, in our math journal, you are going to look at number 6 and you're going to round those to the nearest thousands. So we're going to circle the number in the thousands. Be careful, they might try to trick you on D, E, and F. We're going to go to our neighbor because we are very neighborly in the Portage program. We're going to say to our neighbor, hey neighbor, 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. Or our neighbor is a 2, it's 4 or less, we let it rest. It stays at a 1. And lastly, the ones that we're going to do together. I circled the number in the thousands place, which is a 7. I draw an arrow to my neighbor just to the right. And I say, hey neighbor, 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. Well, it's 5 or more, so I'm going to raise the score of the number that's circled. 1 more than 7 is 8, and everything else turns to a 0. So today was a longer lesson. Rounding is not always an easy concept. We need lots of practice. So today, when you are done with this video, you will finish journal page 29, whatever we didn't do together. And then number 2, IXL skill QV7. Last time I had you go to a SMART score of 80, and it took an incredible amount of problems completed to do that. So I'm going to ask that you do 10 problems correctly before you're done. And again, take your time. If I see that you're doing 30 of them and you're getting 20 wrong to get 10 right, then we'll talk about getting to a SMART score for you. Please make sure you use your whiteboard as you do IXL. It will help you. All right, good luck. Great job, 4th graders.